Holy City Center Radio. It is episode number 35, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. So happy to be back on the microphone and talking with all of you. We got a big show today. I don't want to waste any time. We're going to get right into it. Our guest today is friend of the program, Ashley Mizzell. She is a yoga teacher who is also the founder and executive director of Breath to Blossom, a local nonprofit. You may remember when she previously appeared on Holy City Center Radio back in March of last year. She was episode number 5. So 30 episodes later, can you believe it? She's back. I'm excited to have her here. Breath to Blossom, if you don't remember, connects survivors of various forms of trauma with sliding scale, trauma-informed holistic healing initiatives and programs. You can go back and listen to that episode if you want to deep dive into, everything that she does with that organization. We'll touch on it a little bit, but one of the main reasons I have her here today is we are going to be talking about National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month, which is January, and it is used to raise awareness about the different forms of human trafficking and educating people about this crime and how to spot it. And so with that, you may have seen it in the notes, but a trigger warning, content warning, because we are talking about, trafficking and anything that goes along with it. This could be, the interview specifically could have some difficult moments for people. So keep that in mind that those are the types of topics we'll be talking about. So it may not be appropriate for, all people, or again, might be something that is triggering or tough to listen to. So you may have to skip it if that's the case. But before I talk to Ashley, we got some news to go over since it's been about, I think by the time this comes out, it'll be about 2 weeks since the last episode. So we're going to get you caught up here real quick. We have some quick hitters. I'll try to knock these out of the park real quick. Just get you the details you need to know. First up, Charleston Mayor John Tecklenburg told News 2's Carolyn Murray that he plans to run for another term as the city's leader. He was elected as Charleston's first new mayor in more than 40 years when he replaced longtime Mayor Joseph P. Riley Jr. back in 2016. He then won re-election against Councilman Mike Seekings, another friend of the program, as is Mayor Tecklenburg for that matter. Both have been guests before. That was back in 2019. So, every 3 years. So 2022 will be the next, round. We haven't heard anybody else who has announced that they're going to run for mayor, but as of now, Mayor Tecklenburg appears to be set to run for re-election. And soon, Mayor Tecklenburg will have another person that he'll be working with on the Charleston City Council. Boyd Gregg defeated Sean Pinkston in a runoff election for the City Council's District 1 seat. You may remember that the person who previously held that was Councilwoman Marie Del Chapo. She vacated the seat back in October, citing a health issue, which triggered this special election. It went to a runoff after there was multiple folks running for the seat. No one got 50% of the vote. So Gregg and Pinkston went to a runoff. According to ABC News 4, 1,531 people voted in Berkeley County, which is one of the counties that District 1 falls in. And then another 185 people voted in Charleston County, the other county. So if just for, so you can kind of compare, the voter turnout was about 12% for Berkeley County and about 10.2% for Charleston County. So not very good as usual with any elections, but specifically these special elections, down ballot stuff. But regardless, on that special election on January 11th, as I mentioned, Gregg walked away with the most votes. And Pinkston was the next highest of the 5 candidates, but because neither cleared that 50% threshold, it went to the special election that Gregg has now officially won. That term, pending anything else, leaving office early or anything like that, the term will expire December 31st, 2023. So it'll get back on track with, the normal cycle for that. So we now have a full city council. Now that race is done, all the seats have been filled. So 3 new faces in the end of what we are going to see in this coming year. Speaking of elections, I want to say, and I feel like we're going to be saying a lot of this today, but congrats and good luck to yet another former Holy City Center radio guest, Rajon Lewis, who announced he will be running for the South Carolina House District 97 seat. So good luck to him. You may remember him back at episode 4. He is the executive director of Low Country Youth Services, a nonprofit that aims to create quality programs for youth in the Charleston area. I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. He used to have a podcast too. He's no longer doing that, but is still doing his work with Low Country Youth Services and is now running for office. So best of luck to him. He's already received a couple of endorsements from some other people who work in the South Carolina House. So already off to a good start, and wish him luck. All right, those are kind of the quick hitters. Now we'll go into the topics where we'll dive in a little bit more in depth. This was a somewhat of a big story recently. It's related to our South Carolina Stingrays hockey team. Unfortunately, not good news. We like to talk about them playing well and making it to the finals in their league and stuff like that. But unfortunately, an ugly incident happened recently affecting the team. So a Jacksonville Iceman, that's a team in Florida, of course, a hockey player for that team was suspended by the ECHL, which is the league that the Stingrays play in. And then was cut by his team after he reportedly used a racist gesture towards a black South Carolina Stingrays player during a game on January 22nd. The next day, the league announced the indefinite suspension. It is pending a hearing. He can ask for a hearing and may get reinstated, but the Iceman defenseman, Jacob Panetta, was indefinitely suspended pending that hearing, and then shortly thereafter, his team decided to release him. So what happened? Jordan Subban, who is a forward for the Stingrays, said in a tweet after the game that Panetta had made, quote, monkey gestures, end quote, towards him during the overtime period of the game, which was played in Florida. So after the gesture, they fought, they received major penalties and, et cetera, and were sent to their locker rooms afterwards. So there is some video. It's hard to see what's going on. But supposedly the Panetta, who is white, according to Subban, had made, monkey gestures, like basically saying you're a monkey, obviously racist. So in light of this, South Carolina Stingrays released a statement from owner Rob Concannon, which said, quote, "The South Carolina Stingrays are disgusted and appalled by last night's incident. Our organization stands in support of our friend and teammate Jordan, as well as all other players who continue to deal with racism and discrimination. This behavior has to stop and is unacceptable," end quote. A couple hours after putting out a statement of their own, which was not well received, by the way, the Jacksonville Iceman team put out a second statement after the first one was kind of like, so basically the first statement was kind of like, yeah, we're aware there's an incident, we're going to cooperate with the league and look into it. But no apology, no real nothing. Just kind of like, yeah, we don't know, something's going on. So team CEO, whose name is Andy Kaufman, I can't make it up, he put out the second statement, and he was again criticized because that statement, although much better than the first, included the phrase, quote, "We apologize to anyone who was offended," end quote, which is the classic non-apology apology, of course. Like, I'm sorry you were upset about something that happened. So instead of apologizing just period, or even apologizing to the Stingrays or the player, they just had that blanket kind of sorry to anyone who was offended. This led to some comments on Twitter and things like that in response where, people said this is literally the definition of a non-apology. Despite the, kind of negative feedback, the team kind of just ignored it, and that was their last statement. I guess because they released a player, they kind of are like, we're done with this whole situation. So what did the player, Panetta, have to say on Sunday evening, so the day after the game? He posted a video on his social media platforms in which he apologized for his actions and tried to explain his side of the incident. So even though he apologized and said, I didn't mean it to look the way it did, what he claims is this is something he has done before when he's getting in a fight and he's talking trash or whatever. He does what he calls a tough guy pose, where he tries to call out a guy for being a tough guy. And you have to go watch the video to see how he demonstrates it. But basically he's flexing his arms into his chest. And he says that's him trying to be oh, who's a tough guy? And that the Stingrays player misinterpreted it, according to the guy on Jacksonville, as, being a quote unquote, a monkey gesture. So that's his explanation. He did apologize, even though he's saying hey, that's not what I meant. I also should have known better how this could be misconstrued, and I'm going to do better, and yada 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 yada. So you can go look that up if you want on any of his social channels. That's where it's at. There's been no further information. Again, it's tough to say because the only video that I saw, you couldn't really see what was going on. You could see players were fighting, and you could see something happen, but it's not clear what occurred. And so without the video, it's tough to say for sure. But chances are, if a player in the Stingrays saw it as a racist gesture, that should be enough. It may have been a mistake. He may not have meant it that way, but it's a learning experience for sure. So we'll keep you posted if there's any updates, but at this point, that is it thus far. And that'll do it for the topics this week. There's so much more to talk about. Lawmakers are back in session, and we'll move that to next week's episode. There's a lot of things to cover, some things that have already been, approved and voted on, and things that are in the works, and there's a lot. So we'll cover that. So if you're listening, like, I thought he'd talk about this thing or that thing that happened, don't worry, we will, because these are big issues. But just as important, just as big of an issue is what I'll be talking to my guest about, which is that January is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. My guest, as I mentioned, is Ashley Mizzell. She's a yoga teacher who is also the founder and executive director of Breath to Blossom, a local nonprofit. And as I said before, she previously guested on this show. So if you want to learn more about the nonprofit, even though we do talk about a little bit, go back to episode 5 from March of 2021 and get the rundown there. But Ashley knows so much about this topic. She's just a wealth of knowledge. And I think it's really important to listen to this interview, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. There's a lot of things people don't know about, modern day slavery and human trafficking. I always learn a lot about this topic when I'm following Ashley's social channels and listening to this interview too. And anytime we talk about it, just so much to take in. And again, it's important, but it is a trigger warning, content warning on this episode. We don't talk about anything graphic, but, if these topics are something that can be difficult for you, you may want to skip the interview. But if you can listen to it, I just like all interviews, I encourage you to. But this one's very important with a whole lot of information and resources for you. So without any further delay, we'll move on to my interview with Ashley Mizzell. Joining me now is my friend Ashley Mazzell, also a friend of the program. You were returning, Ashley, to Holy City Center Radio. I looked it up. You were guest number 5, or at least episode number 5, back in March of 2021. So it's almost been a year since your last visit. I'm so happy to have you back. Thanks for coming on.
That is so wild. Thanks for having me, Christian. What an honor and a privilege it was to be your 5th guest on your podcast. And wait, how many podcasts have you done now?
So this is episode 35. So 30 episodes after your first visit, you were back.
Wow. That's wild.
Yeah, and I'm excited. I'm sure listeners are as well, because your episode was very well received. People were really interested in Breath to Blossom and the work that you were doing. And when we talked about a year ago, you were just kind of getting going. You had ideas, you had plans, but it was still very much in its infancy. So, here you are, almost a year after that. What has the growth been like for your nonprofit? What is changed in a year? I'm sure it's a ton.
Yeah, so March will make it a year that we kind of did a pre-launch, and I was like, so I'm going to start organizing this thing. Let's just start gathering resources and see what's happened. And, I was already involved with all the clinicians who would be working with us, and they were on board. And so it's been a fun journey. I think it's been a little over 9 months now. So yeah, it's like time to actually birth this thing. I mean, to say we're in our infancy as an organization is still sort of an understatement, but we have grown so much. It's really cool to see everything just come together and evolve. And I can't say it enough that it's just every person who comes our way is just, it feels like divinely guided, like a divinely guided encounter. I love it.
And, in that same time frame, you have hosted, several events, some smaller ones, but you also had a big event at South Carolina. Was it Society Hall downtown, which looked like it went
Mhm.
really, really well. And you partnered with someone else who's been on the show. Chelsea Green
Mhm.
was part of that. It was like an art auction, and there was food and drinks. How did that event end up going?
It was so good. Yeah, shout out to Chelsea Green. Chelsea's also a part of Breath to Blossom. She's on our advisory board, and she's like my, I don't know what you call her, like not for profit business bestie. Um, so, yeah, she was the lead organizer with Art for Good. That was the end of the year event that benefited Breath to Blossom. And we had so many cool artists who were able to showcase their work and debut their work, who haven't been in commercial art galleries yet. So it was awesome. It was awesome to see that. Seth G, played
Mm-hmm.
his violin, and it went by so fast because Chelsea and I were just so busy
Oh, I
the
bet.
whole time. We were like, what? It's over?
Hopefully you got to enjoy a little bit at least. I know it's tough. Like when you run events, you don't get to really enjoy it as much as the others, but hopefully you had a little bit of time to enjoy it, or at least after the fact could look back and be like, wow, we did it.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit of that. So it was great. It was great. No complaints.
Very cool. And another thing you launched is small group and like one-on-one coaching. That was something that launched over the last year as well, correct?
Yes. So that is within the Breath to Blossom model and open to the public as well. The public's always welcome to utilize our services as well, but just in a different capacity with how that intake looks.
Right. And, you had mentioned some of the folks you had seen through Breath to Blossom, through the normal channels I think you said divine intervention almost like, that this was meant to be. What has the response been from, for what you can tell for people like that, or just the community in general to your organization and the work you're trying to do?
All ends, like all moving parts. I can say that for sure. When you say divine intervention, like, oh my gosh, I need this, like, or this, I came across this at the perfect time, is something that I hear on all sides of this. For people who are being served, for those who are serving, or people who just want to be in community at some capacity. So that's all. That always makes me feel good, because that's what this is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a collaborative compassion project, always mutually beneficial. Every person, part of it should feel empowered and just having fun.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that, and I'm so excited to see how much it's grown, and it's doing some great work. And like you said, it's still very new, still so much more to go. But I'm glad that it's working in the way you wanted it to work, and you're well on your way. And one of the things, I mentioned it in the intro, but the organization helps people who have gone through various forms of trauma. And, that trauma can be any number of things. But specifically today, I also wanted you to come back because January is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. Potentially could have people coming to Breath to Blossom that have been victims of that. And so I know that is something that you are knowledgeable about and passionate about. So I want to have you on today to kind of talk about this topic as it relates to your nonprofit, but really in general too, because it's still something I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So, to get started, for those who don't know, yes, this is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. It was started, I think the last few presidents have all recognized it. And, the whole point is to raise awareness about the different forms of human trafficking and educating people about this crime, how to spot it, etc. But even with that, just like everything else today, we got to make sure we're operating with the same, definitions and things, because people hear these terms and they might not know exactly what it is. So to you, someone who has studied and has knowledge of this, what does human trafficking and modern day slavery, look like, right, for where we are right now?
Yeah, so trafficking can look different for every situation, but essentially, what trafficking is, there's so much to demystify and to debunk. So, trafficking is one. Most people, when they think of it, they first think of children overseas, being imported, exported, or whatever, internationally. You hear the Wayfair stories. I don't know anything about Wayfair, whatever that is. Yes, trafficking can happen internationally. But I think it is very important for people to pay attention to what's happening domestically in all of our communities, and how that looks for children, various age groups, and any gender. So it's going to look different in every town and in every age group, and different settings as well. So trafficking can happen through coercion or force or fraud, pimping or pandering as well. And through those different methods, there's going to be different approaches by each person to do any of that. So with children, though, I would say any way this can look, the way there's trafficking, how it intersects also in different industries, because we have labor trafficking, we have sex trafficking, we have familial trafficking. When it comes down to anyone under the age of 18 and anything that's typically questionable with the exploitation, I mean, that's usually just immediately we consider that trafficking. So there's a lot to break down in what I just said right there. Did any of that make sense?
No, of course. Yeah. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, because it's not just like this cut and dry, necessarily easy thing to define. And you kind of touched on something as well that's a big problem, which is misinformation and misconceptions. You mentioned the whole Wayfair story. I'll try to run through it real quick for those who aren't familiar. Wayfair, of course, sells furniture and things like that online. They're kind of a cheaper version of like a West Elm or something like that. And this thing a year ago now, last year, 2 years ago, I can't remember. Everything's all blurred now, but there was this conspiracy theory out there because someone had located some items on the store that were like crazy prices, like way more than they normally are for certain items, and the items had names attached to them. So it'd be like the Joshua shelf or whatever. And so people were then looking up these names and be like, well, Joshua I just used because that was the first thing that came to my head. But there were some more unique names, and then they would search and like, wait, that's the name of a girl who's been missing, or a guy that's been missing since whatever year. And the conspiracy was that this was how people could order children. Basically, they go on Wayfair, they find one of these things and order them. Obviously, there was no truth to that. It was a conspiracy. And you mentioned that, but there's also, I think it was like, I don't want to say the wrong hashtag for like a legitimate one, but there was a hashtag that went along, again, a couple years ago, where a lot of people who thought, oh, if by sharing this hashtag, I'm helping save the children from sex trafficking. And what it really was like a QAnon thing where they were trying to bring, well-meaning people who are like, yeah, of course I support this. Of course I want to raise awareness, not realizing it was bringing them into that world of conspiracies and things like that. So you're battling that as well as just, normal, well-meaning people who just don't quite understand things because they haven't been taught or haven't learned about it.
Exactly.
So there's so much to combat.
Absolutely. And that's one thing is absolutely, it's good to see people care, but we need to go in the right direction of where we care. So yeah, that thing that happened 2 years ago, and then, there was talk of the QAnon stuff within that too. It's just a mess.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, trafficking, many people think that it's so sensationalized.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately people go to thinking of that movie Taken with Liam Neeson, and, you know, the daughter went to France or something, somewhere overseas, and it was sold into sex slavery and was taken to all these different countries and bidded on. And, you know, it's like an action-packed movie. And we know the trafficking, the exploitation of selling your children happens a lot in other countries and Cambodia. And that's all very, very tragic. But I think we need to stop overlooking vulnerable populations. It's so much easier sometimes in America for us to turn our nose up at other people, as if we're standing on higher moral ground at times, and not realizing those people you're turning your nose up at are, you know, people who are in need of help. So
For sure. And there's two sides. First of all, we shouldn't be doing that no matter what. You know, as you mentioned, like, we shouldn't be, as a country, turning our noses up at other countries. But in addition to that, it's because it's not like our country's hands are clean. You know, the trafficking happens here in the United States far more than people realize. And I'm sure the numbers are, you know, not accurate because it's hard to keep track of these things, of course. But earlier this month, South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson said the state is seeing a steady increase in the number of children identified of victims of human trafficking based on data from the state's annual report. So the official numbers that he put out were there was a 15% increase in the number of victims reported to the National Human Trafficking Hotline from this area. And a spokesman for his office said there were 121 cases reported in 2021, which was down from 129 in 2020. But the number of victims reported is actually up 179 to 206 from 2020 to 2021. So we're not just seeing that it's here in this country and here in this state, but it also appears to be increasing or holding steady. So this is very much a problem in this country as well.
Yes, it is a growing problem. The one thing, though, that is important that I do want to highlight is that statistics are still kind of very skewed at the same time. So even when we go to the most credible organizations, you know, like the National Missing and Exploited Children, and even the National Human Trafficking Hotline, the way it comes down to how they take account for each instance and each individual, sometimes repeated things, it's recycled, it's not accounted for properly. With children, runaway children, sometimes that is not a proper count either. It's a bit skewed because the whole intake process that happens with runaways, or even those who maybe foster children and age out, and the process they go through in the system with how they're asked questions, there's a lot of reasoning for that. But trafficking is a growing issue, and it's a growing enterprise as well. They said human trafficking is the fastest growing enterprise of the 21st century. I read that, I think, in a book from Melissa Farley. She has a lot of good studies, Dr. Melissa Farley. Like, she is someone I love to follow, who's a really credible resource. There's so many just recycled statistics over and over again. So when it comes to a lot of things, you know, it's very much a hearsay thing.
Right.
If you're not going directly to the source of a survivor or someone who's currently in the life of exploitation.
You know, I'm looking at some of these other numbers too, and you're right, because like there was another report that came out from the Human Trafficking Institute in October for, all the states and things like that. And then South Carolina, they said only 2 new criminal human trafficking cases were filed in federal courts in 2020. 0 defendants were convicted. So number one, there's no way that there was only 2 cases in the state. That just happens to be 2 that went to trial and everything. So that's, numbers are skewed, but also, no defendants were convicted. How it's got to be so frustrating as someone who works in this field to see so few people being charged, not a lot being done. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's difficult, I'm sure, to put cases together. But it seems like it's under prosecuted as well.
Oh yeah, definitely under prosecuted. You're more likely, I think it was Harmony Grillo, or she said, you're more likely to get struck by lightning to be prosecuted for trafficking.
Wow.
And any prosecution or penalization usually happens, unfortunately, to women. This is not gender specific, but with all of the things in violence against women, exploitation of women, they're just disproportionately impacted with all angles and approaches this is taken with. So yeah, I mean, there are crazy statistics in police reports of, how many women are even criminalized for prostitution who
Right.
have been trafficked versus, buyers of sex or traffickers or pimps, any of it.
That's wild. I want to reiterate that because I had forgotten that, and I want to make sure people heard that. But in these situations, a woman is more likely to be charged with something like prostitution or a similar crime, more likely to be charged than, someone who may be trafficking her or the person who was purchasing services. That is wild and awful. And I think that's there's so much important about this, but I think that's a really important point that this is a situation where there's so many different levels to it. And that's just another one.
So many layers, so many.
And, to bring it home, not that we, should have to have a specific story for people to be like, oh, okay. But it's recent, and I've talked about it before on this podcast. But the one that's gotten the most headlines as far as a trafficking case, a 17-year-old girl, obviously supposed to be in high school at that age, was being sex trafficked and fed drugs to keep her, in this state. And a guy from Mount Pleasant was arrested. Several people were, but it started with this business owner from Mount Pleasant. And that's still an ongoing case. I mean, this is happening in our backyard. And again, that's one story of so many that we don't even know about. And I think a lot of people probably assume when it comes to trafficking, it's a scenario, like you said, like Taken, some person is on their own in another country or even here and they're walking late at night and they just get snatched and that's it. But it's not always that case. Sometimes it's, someone that's considered a friend, grooming and things like that. It takes different forms as far as how someone gets, brought into this world.
Oh, yes, absolutely. There are so many different tactics and so many different kinds of exploiters and who are very sophisticated and they can keep up, with the times, and the internet is a very prevalent place for this to happen, to make it, to exploit more and more vulnerabilities of people. So the more vulnerabilities someone has, the easier it is to potentially exploit them if they know how to meet all of those needs, psychologically.
For people who are listening and, they're thinking about this whole topic, I think there's 2 things we should cover. One is, are there any warning signs that are pretty ubiquitous with these situations that if you're out somewhere or whatever, that you may notice someone who's being trafficked? Are there certain ways, like certain warning signs that people can see? And then if they do notice something like that, is there like a general best practice as what the next step would be?
Yeah. So, I mean, signs to look out for. I mean, if you're just out and about, maybe use your intuition for that sort of thing. You can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline if you'd like. Call the police. A lot of people I've known personally who saw something suspicious, and have called the cops, it was kind of like the cops didn't really care, or just like, and that's in Charles. But I mean, you do what you can as far as, your children. We all know teenagers are going to be teenagers, but just noticing if they need to have private conversations, or for anyone of that matter. Like, of course, you're going to need to have private conversations, but if it's your child, if their whereabouts are becoming more questionable, I think the best thing, I myself am not a parent, but I think having open communication, and just opening up space for authenticity to actually hold space for your child can go a really long way in parenting, so that they can have an open relationship with you. I think it's important too, if you notice lots of new items that a child or anyone could have, or possessions, where it just doesn't add up. Those are some things to look for, as well. I want to say, the Jeffrey Epstein case, I have to be careful because I'm on a podcast, but I think the Jeffrey Epstein case, it was, people were like looking at that case for years. But one thing that really brought something to light too was, a woman finding, a lot of cash in one of her daughter's nightstands. And that kind of sparked another case opening, I believe, with Jeffrey Epstein. So, I mean, that, has been kind of popular in the news lately as well, and has gotten people thinking a bit, with Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah, that's going to be something we're going to keep learning more and more about as time goes on with these trials and stuff, for sure. And it gets more horrific each time new information comes out.
Yeah. I appreciate it kind of being finally brought to light. I mean, it sucks. But it gives people an idea that, the people who do this are people who are often very respected and look normal and are laundering their money.
The report I mentioned before, the one with for the state of South Carolina, it listed some other things too, which I think are interesting. It listed the top 5 sex trafficking venues, number 1. So some of these you might say, okay, this makes sense. And when I say you, I'm talking to the people listening. And others, you might not have really put it together that this could be a trafficking situation. They also listed the top 4 labor trafficking venues. So I'll go over both. First, the report for the top 5 sex trafficking venues. Number 1 was internet-based commercial sex. Number 2 was illicit massage or spa business. Number 3 was pornography. 4 was like being like a hostess or something at a strip club. Number 5 was a personal, like an escort, basically, is what number 5 is. So some of those you're like, okay, yeah, that's kind of what I imagine. Others, people might be like, oh, I never thought about that. And then the other list, which was the top 4 labor trafficking venues, hospitality was number 1. Forestry and reforestation was number 2. Agriculture, farm, animal husbandry was 3, and construction was 4. So, we've been talking about trafficking and children and things, and a lot of people think of sex trafficking, but there's also that labor trafficking, which was that second list I mentioned. So those are other things, for people to keep in mind as they learn more about this, or if they're concerned about someone they know. Those are and again, it's not, the same across the board. It can happen anywhere and in any fashion, but those are the most well-known venues for those types of things. Based on that report, is that similar to what you found in your studies and research and things like that?
Yes, absolutely. And we know that with labor trafficking too, with, many immigrants who come here and are in those lines of work. So for sure, when we look at trafficking as a whole, it's 70% of women are trafficked into commercial sex. So that's going to be your porn, your stripping, and your legal brothels, anything in that realm. So there needs to be sort of the attitude of people who just think, well, they're consenting, adults. Like, people don't realize on like the other side, like how people get there, and it's 70% because the sex industry is, like $1 billion industry. Like, they make more than the NFL and the NBA, and there's so much shame around it. But obviously, like, people are paying money for these things. So, I mean, but it's kept so quiet. So the shame, first of all, needs to be released so we can actually protect the people who need to be protected.
I think I saw you posted that I think Pornhub specifically gets more views than like all the like Hulu, Netflix, all those combined. I think that's what the stat said.
Yeah.
I might be misremembering, but
yes, and that was a statistic I put for internationally. So
right.
Yeah. So all of those platforms combined, yes.
And
a lot of
you think, oh, pornography, and this is kind of when you had done an Instagram live, which had kind of sparked in my mind, like, oh, I should have Ashley on to talk about this, because there was some stuff where, just like I've been saying, there's some stuff like, yeah, this makes sense, whatever. But yeah, you don't always think about things like pornography. You just assume, oh, this is a business. Like, these are these companies, right? They make porn, and you don't realize that that's not always the case. Sometimes it's not a company at all. And even if there is like a big name behind it, doesn't mean it's legitimate. And that doesn't mean that trafficking's not happening. You just assume like, oh, these people must be consenting adults. You don't realize that, there could be people being trafficked and forced into this line of work. Just because you're seeing it on a big website and, whatever, doesn't mean that there's not something far darker going on behind the scenes.
That's correct. So, I always tell everyone this to kind of put it into perspective that, I don't know how everyone views porn as an industry, but when we, glamorize it, and I'm not disempowering anyone who works in the commercial sex industry. I think it's important, just like any other industry, to protect more than the 1%, because choice is not always choice for everyone. There's limited choice for others, and there's some people who really don't want to be there. And it wasn't as consensual, or there was a very thorough, long grooming and manipulative process to get there. If you are going to traffic someone, if you have drugs to sell, you have a product. You need a product that needs to be refilled often, or a referral base or something. If you have a human, they're providing a service. So you can groom them for however, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, a year and a half. If you do it right and figure out that person and how to meet their needs psychologically, protecting them, you give them love, and there's other approaches too. The rate of the return on your investment would technically be worth it if this person can provide a service 3 times a day that is astronomically way more than what your product is. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
So that's why this sort of thing can happen, and why it does happen. Like I said, I like to put it into perspective. It's even your award-winning porn stars who are sometimes under third-party pimp control. Right.
That's true. That's a good point. Right.
That is a fact. That is a fact. And unfortunately, I know that to be a fact. And I do this because of the heart I have for women who are working in the industry. who have been friends of mine and people I've met. So, when we look at the porn capitals of the US, LA, Miami, those people are coming, sometimes from other countries, especially Miami, from Cuba, from other Latin American countries and Spanish-speaking countries, whether you might be a woman who you're having trouble finding employment and, work in the commercial sex industry is an easy way to provide an income for you. I get it. But there's people in those settings always looking to recruit. We're looking often everywhere else other than the source, of going directly where we need to. So that's huge. So whether you already went in and then were trafficked while you were in, because you're susceptible for all sorts of things. When you work in the commercial sex industry at any level, doesn't matter how elite you are in the game or what your clientele base is, you are up against more than you can be up against in any job. You have the same PTSD that typically mirrors in this population in their physiology of combat war veterans, because it's probably the only other dangerous job than being in the military.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I don't know. I definitely know what you mean. And it's so sad to think about that. But you're right. Yeah. The PTSD, the trauma that they're facing can't be that different, like you said, than from someone in the military. It's a different situation, but a lot of similarities for sure. That definitely makes sense now that you've said that. And, this is a issue we could talk about forever and ever because there's so many layers to it, like you mentioned, and it intersects every level of our country and the world. Doesn't matter how much money you have or your background or anything, you can be affected by this in some capacity, but it also is a reflection on some other issues that we already have globally and in this country, whether it's misogyny, objectification of women, if I could speak. And also this, like you mentioned before, it is affecting the most vulnerable among us in many situations, whatever that may be, depending on the situation. And, I think it ties into other things too, just like, when children go missing, we think about that young woman who was missing and people feared dead. Gabby was her first name that, was big in the news. And then talking about when people go missing like that, pretty young white women get way more news coverage than people of color. And so that factors in here too, because people who are missing and could be being trafficked, or whether it's labor trafficking, sex trafficking, what have you, are less likely to be looked into, or less likely to get coverage, and thus are less likely to be found. So, I mean, it ties into all sorts of things, and probably so many other things that I'm not even thinking of off the top of my head, but other issues that we have.
So many. I mean, we have little Black girls going missing every single day. That should get your attention. You don't need ads of, children in third world countries starving, for you to want to get up and buy a plane ticket. And, it's enough right here. Like, yes, we should go help those people too.
Of course.
But
right.
we, get real about the people who are being victimized from this or have overcame this. We all look just like each other, We go to the same grocery stores. We work out at the same gyms. And like we saw with the Epstein case, there's so many different ways this sort of stuff looks like. The girl next to you at your gym or wherever you like to go, who wears the same exact clothes as you, may drive the same luxury car as you. You don't know. It looks so different in every situation.
The Epstein thing is a real story. It's horrible, it's horrific, and yet there's so many conspiracies and wild things that you hear out there that just aren't true, that aren't helping the situation at all. So I encourage people who are listening, to really look into reputable sources. Don't go looking up all these conspiracy theories and things and, the whole Hollywood cabal thing, and not saying that there aren't horrible people in Hollywood or wherever, or these things aren't happening, but really try to educate yourself and look into, slavery and human trafficking from reputable sources. And even then, like you said, a lot of that data is skewed. So keep that in mind. Do you have any particular resources that you trust or think can help people understand this issue more, as well as ways that people can help?
Yeah. So as far as credible studies, to just narrow it down, Dr. Melissa Farley, tons of great studies, reliable source. There's a ton other out there. So maybe after you go to her, you'll find the next one and the next one and the next one of credible people. Things to take action, definitely National Human Trafficking Hotline. Call that if you see something or you feel like you're in a situation. If you see someone who looks like they could be in a situation, slide them the number, be very discreet. And even if you think you have a friend or family member who may be in a situation like this, it's very much applicable to someone who may be in a domestic violence situation as well, because you just want to be discreet. So National Human Trafficking Hotline, it's 1-888-373-7888. You can also text the SMS number 233-733. You can text help or info to either of those. It comes in English, Spanish, 200 languages total, 24 hours, 7 days a week. The Formation Project has a really cool drop-in center here in Charleston. They help with resources as well. If you are in the Charleston or surrounding area and you have someone who may be overcoming this, or it's questionable if they're in a situation, you can kindly tell them about us and just have them, shoot us an email, and then they'll know about our intake process and go from there. But also we're here to hold space for anyone who doesn't self-identify, because that's their own agency and their own choice. Many people this has happened to don't even self-identify in America because of the grooming, the manipulation. This is also why, when we go back to statistics, many of these trafficking cases are actually reported to as domestic violence cases. Because if they take the Romeo pimp approach in that form of trafficking, it just looks like your boyfriend.
Right.
And even with the domestic violence cases, that data is skewed, because sometimes in South Carolina, it takes you getting stabbed or shot or severely beaten for it actually to be a case, unfortunately. So we have a long way to go in law enforcement. From a trauma-informed approach and just being competent enough to know how to navigate our way through. But it's getting better with better trainings across the U.S., but nothing happens overnight, and nothing will ever be perfect.
No, of course not. But, we can be better, as you mentioned, and the first step of being better with anything is always education. Learn about things from reliable sources, seek out information on your own, in the good way, not the I'm going to do my own research way that we've heard over the last couple of years as it relates to COVID, but, like real research, actually looking into things, talking to people who are knowledgeable about this and things like that, reading the books and, like you mentioned, and studies. And that's the first step. And I think we've got, anybody who this is new to, or they learn something, I think what you've said today is a good first step to have people learn a little bit and they can set out on their own for those next steps. And I'm going to put as many links and things as I can in the show notes for those of you listening, as well as that hotline number that Ashley gave out. So if you didn't catch it, I'm going to put that in the show notes as well. And also, of course, we started talking about your nonprofit, Breath to Blossom. So if people want to learn more about that, you have websites and social channels. What's the best way for people to learn more about Breath to Blossom?
Are we already wrapping this up? I had so much to say.
Oh, well, don't worry. I'll give you a chance. I want to make sure we get that out of the way first.
Okay, so you can head over to breath2blossom.org, breath2blossom.org. digit 2 is in the middle. You can send us an email to our general email, contact@breath2blossom.org. That's actually spelt out, no digits, contact@breath2blossom.org. And again, you can follow us on all of our social accounts, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, @breath2blossom, all spelt out, all letters.
And that I'll have those links in the show notes as well. I wanted to make sure we get that out of the way. But yeah, that I wanted to make sure you also, being as well, I don't know if you consider yourself this, but I say you're the subject matter expert on this topic, at least of people I know. So I wanted to make sure that, yes, I'm sure there's so much more to talk about. And what have we not touched on yet that you think is important or you want to get out there?
I think that I want people, if anyone listens to this and they're like, well, what did I just listen to? Like, we're all doomed. Like, I just call a number and they don't record data properly. Listen, the hotline is great. They do good things. But what it all comes down to is what we all want is more resources for people. So, the spiritual side of me as a yoga teacher and all the things I do is get out of a scarcity mindset. Don't be afraid to share. Don't be afraid to give. Don't be afraid to provide knowledge and resources and step out of your social location. And it's absolutely crazy that how can I be the first person that I know of, I could be wrong, but cares to have an organization for wellness for people who work in the sex industry. Like, that's just wild to me what people are up against every day in these places. And the people who can afford these services are the men in our town who are high earners. That is absolutely wild to me. People who can afford to go to the illicit massage parlors in the back of businesses here and, where they're at, those are the men who can afford to go buy sex on their lunch break. Those are not your neighborhood, drug dealer pimps. It's not like Hustle and Flow. It's not like the movie Taken. This is Charleston, South Carolina, and we've seen what that looks like.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be this like you said, that kind of like Taken, like this international criminal organization that's so well, funded and run and all that. It's just regular people, or like you said, regardless, of how much money and things that they have, it's not always what you think it's, who's behind these things.
Right.
And the more I've looked into it, the more I've learned, with the whole Mount Pleasant thing, more and more people keep getting arrested. They arrested another gentleman. I forget what his ties were, but also a woman. And this woman who was arrested was allegedly part of the scheme to like lure this poor girl in, as like a trusted, like, oh, she's a woman, too. So, you can trust her, listen to her. And, she was part of the reason that she got started down this path of being fed drugs and then brought into sex trafficking. Like, it takes many different forms.
Oh, yes. It's very common to have another girl within, a ring, a team, or whatever you want to call it, recruit other women. That's not uncommon at all. But the thing is, though, is the intersectionality of trafficking with, porn and stripping and just all forms of the commercial sex industry and everything else with trafficking. It's important to just understand that, no one should be shamed. I think at the end of the day, we all need to release shame around sex, and we need to also care about anyone on any side of these transactions, as crazy as that sounds, because these people are suffering too. We've seen how many people suffer with pornography addiction. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We know that people sometimes start selling drugs to just take care of their family. And this is why a lot of women go into prostitution too. Some people sell their bodies because they need to just be able to pay for their medicine because they can't afford their medicine. You know what I mean? So mm-hmm. It comes down to resources. And so we also need to understand this is also about protecting people. So when you say decriminalize sex work or legalize sex work, you got to understand the difference between all of those things, because there are a lot of sex workers' rights groups who just scream, legalize sex work, and it doesn't really protect women or sex workers in general. And because those groups are the people with less vulnerabilities, their voices are amplified a little bit more. So they do get more funding. And so there needs to be a little bit more attention towards this so that people are, protected. So that the criminalization, that's a full criminalization, is when everyone gets arrested. Like everyone's subject to arrest. So that's going to be your buyers, your pimps, your traffickers, and anyone who's been involved with prostitution. Legalization, like full legalization, is when prostitution is essentially like permitted and regulated. So that looks like red light districts and legal brothels. And then you have the decriminalization. Full decrim would be you just remove all laws on prostitution. So that's pimping, pandering, the buying of sex, and then also selling sex. So it just removes all laws. And then the abolition model, which is also called the equality model, that would recognize a woman shouldn't be punished, a woman or an individual shouldn't be punished for their own exploitation. And what would be illegal is pimping, pandering, and buying sex. I know a lot of people aren't going to like that. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that. I know, I'm sorry. People buy escorts every day. I'm sorry. And then what would be legal is selling sex, because you're not encouraging anyone to actually sell sex. What this would do is actually begin to penalize people who are exploiting others' vulnerabilities. And so with the person who is selling sex, the person who essentially is involved more on prostitution as the service provider, they would receive programs that would provide, rehabilitation opportunities and resources to kind of open up a new pathway outside of prostitution. Because 84% of people, that's a general stat, who are in prostitution have been trafficked in. So there's a lot more who have been trafficked in than anything. So, and this includes, with that support of, that abolition and equality model, that includes more trauma-informed care too, because as we know, when you've got a regulated nervous system, when you're taking care of yourself, that translates over into so many other areas of your life. And that's why we do what we do. And our tagline is nurturing the power within. So I hope that made sense.
Oh, it did. Absolutely.
Provide a little bit more context to kind of tie it all together a bit.
No, I know it's tough because we have like a limited time frame with, podcasts and stuff. And it's such a topic where there's, like we've talked about multiple times, so many layers and different sides to it. And even you kind of just demonstrated there, ways to fix or, we can't really fix these issues. Like you said, it's never going to be perfect, but alleviate some of the issues. There's disagreements of what the best course of action is for that. And then on top of the front end of trying to stop it on the front end, as you mentioned, there's not necessarily a lot of things for people who are able to get out, for their treatment. You are one organization here in Charleston that is offering that, but there's still, plenty of opportunities, I'm sure, for folks who do get out, who need that kind of treatment or, help. So there's just so much to it. And I know I probably should have just said, all right, go give a lecture and let you just talk without any questions. But, I think you did a great job of explaining it. Every time I hear you talk about it, I learn a little bit more, and hopefully people who listen to this learn more too. And I know this won't be the last time we talk in general on this show, because I'm sure I'll have you back again and we can go more into this topic later. But I think this is a great place for people to start and how to find some more information. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about a difficult subject. And also thank you for the work you're doing in our community.
Thank you, Christian. I always appreciate your kind and encouraging words. It's always refreshing to talk to you. I don't know if you're going to edit this out, but it's so refreshing to talk to you. You're just such a good person. It's like you're one of those friends where it feels like you're just, coming home every time,
Oh, we're definitely leaving this in. Please.
No, you're such a good person. I want to tell on how great you are, because you're just so kind and giving, and you always want to do better, you always want to be better, you always want to make the world a better place. And every day, like, life moves so fast, and so sometimes when I ask you how you're doing, or you ask me how I'm doing, it's just so refreshing when you can be around people like you. Just genuine people. So thank you for all that you do and all of your hard work. I can't thank you enough, truly. But also I want to add a little promo piece in here before I forget.
Go right ahead.
We have monthly recurring yoga classes at the Society Hall. The next one, I don't know if this will be up by then, February 7th, Monday, 6:30 p.m. at the Society Hall. Tickets are $10, available on Eventbrite, recurring monthly yoga class for the community. It's called Yoga for Good. Our location for Breath to Blossom, there's a lot of discretion around it because of the nature of the work we do. However, we do have a private membership base outside of BTB Academy. So BTB Academy is the nonprofit core mission of what we do, but we have an Embody membership where you have small group yoga and you are able to have Reiki, yoga therapy, stretch therapy, and chiropractic work at an extremely discounted rate. So head over to breath2blossom.org to schedule a consultation.
Yeah, this episode will be out before then. So for sure, go and find out more about Yoga for Good being held in February, as Ashley just mentioned. There'll be other events in the future. So be sure to keep an eye on that. And I tend to share these events on my channels as well. And thank you for the super kind words. I don't know how to respond to that. That was too much, but I appreciate
Did I make you uncomfortable?
a little. That was too much. I mean, no, it's always nice to hear, nice things, of course, but I don't know what to do with that stuff. But thank you so much for saying all that. It was very kind to you. The feeling is very much mutual, and I'm so glad that our paths crossed and we're friends and we're able to, use each other's platforms, in a mutually beneficial way to get the word out there. And if anybody follows either one of us on socials and things, they know that we both, outside of, Holy City Center and Breath to Blossom, that we try to stay active in what's going on in the world and news and in Charleston specifically. And, it's good to have a good community here of folks who are like-minded and trying to do better and make the city and, hopefully by extension, the state and the country and the world from there, you have better places. So thank you. And the feeling is mutual. And thank you so much for coming on again. And I look forward to talking to you again offline, but also on the show again in the future.
All right. Talk soon. Thanks, Christian.
All right. Thank you again to my guest, Ashley Mazzell. Such a good interview. Learned a lot. I hope you all did too. I'll have all the links and things in the show notes because there was a lot that I think we talked about that you may want to look further into. But just to reiterate, the National Human Trafficking Hotline is 1-888-373-7888. You can also text the word help or the word info to 233-733. If you need any help, suspect there's something going on, those are the numbers to do so. And I'll put those in the show notes as well. Thank you for listening. It was another great show. Happy to do another awesome episode for you all. I hope you all enjoyed. You can rate and review. You can share this podcast. That helps out. You can also go to holycitycenter.com/shop to pick up some merchandise. You can also go to patreon.com/holycitycenter to help out, with funds and things to offset the cost of the site and the podcast and all that good stuff. But if you can't, no problem. Just keep sharing, liking, listening, reading, whatever. All that stuff helps as well. Thank you to Tyler Boone, who provides the music for each and every episode of Holy City Center Radio, Lindsay Marie Collins for producing every episode, and Grace Lancaster Gogan for creating the logo. We cannot wait to talk to you again next week. I already got a bunch of topics ready to go. Hopefully I won't have to cut more. I've only got limited time. I'm trying to keep it short for you all, but I can be a little verbose at times. But with that, I'll let you go. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk soon. Good night and good luck.